Welcome back to another Relearning Economics live stream. I want to cover a few extra things today that we didn't cover on Friday about reserve banking. We're going to cover the balance sheets of the central bank, of federal treasuries, of commercial banks, and then, the balance sheets that you and I have, and we're going to interlock them all together. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Stay tuned.
You are now relearning economics.
Hope everybody is well. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and leave comments underneath the video. It helps with the algorithm. So we did a live stream on Friday, one of my better ones. I think it's the most viewed one so far on this fledgling reboot of a channel. But we need to take it a little further. And I thought, okay, well, Steve did a little bit of Godley table work on that stream, showing the basic operations. And what he was trying to say is that government spending is creating fiat currency. And we had I wouldn't say a disagreement. I had posted a thread on X and he clarified some terminology that might be better used in the thread. So he suggested an edit. I didn't edit it though. I was too lazy. But I did generally agree with what he's saying, but with the context that there are some nuances to it that we have to explore. And I think the best way I can do that today is bust out the Ravel software and build out some Godley tables and track all of this, because there's a lot of nuance. So yeah, the government spends money into existence so it taxes, right? And then it'll spend. And if it spends more than it's taxing, deficit spending, it's actually creating currency in a roundabout way, but there's a lot of nuances. And I've always thought it was important not to make blanket simplified statements that can be misinterpreted by some as gospel and misinterpreted by others as being factually incorrect, and therefore the theory altogether must be wrong. I don't like that, so I like to go a little bit deeper. Everybody in the chat, I hope you are doing well today. Make sure you say hello. That'd be nice, just so I know you're here, that we're connected, that we're one in all, and you're subscribed too, so we're together into the bitter end. Either you die, or this channel dies, or I die. Those are the three options after you click the subscribe button. Or you unsubscribe. I guess that's a fourth option. That could be one too. But let's bring up the Godley tables. I'll pop it open here. Stand by. We're going to share the entire screen so you get the pop-ups and everything along with that. And we'll make this big. We'll maximize it. Go right to the screen. So let's start where Steve kind of left off and began yesterday. So if we grab a Godley table, and this isn't going to be an exercise on how to use Ravel, I just want to show the interlocking Godley tables. And we're going to start by looking from the perspective of a commercial bank. So we'll make sure we title these as we go. So we'll call this commercial bank. And this represents all commercial banks. Commercial banks. We'll double click it. We'll open up the table itself. And so I was reading some of the comments on the last video, and one of them said it was too fast. Steve generally talks fast. I generally talk fast. And sometimes we got to slow it down a bit and explain what we're seeing and how everything works. So you're looking at a table right now, and along the top, so the columns, these are your stocks, right? And then along the side, we'll increase the flows. And those are your flows, right? So a flow accumulates or deaccumulates a stock, right? And so in economics or accounting, your stocks are either going to be assets or liabilities, and it's going to equal equity at the end. So we'll start with Steve's prospect that governments tax and they spend. Anything more than what they tax is deficit spending. We'll show all that. So we can create This is looking from the bank's perspective, okay? And we're going to look from the Treasury's perspective. We're going to look from the central bank's perspective. We're going to look from yours and I's, you and I, our perspective, the household perspective. We're going to look at all of them, right? Because when you do that, the assets switch, right? So somebody's asset is another person's liability. Another person's liability is somebody else's asset when it comes to financial assets. When it comes into non-financial assets, that's a different case altogether. So first, I'm going to create reserves. Okay, and these are the reserves that commercial banks hold at the central bank. It's an asset for banks. Banks also have their main liability, which is deposits. And these are deposits that firms have, households have, etc., etc. It's a liability for the bank. And then we also have bank equity. Now, commercial banks, by the very nature of their business, must be in positive equity. It's not like a non-financial corporation where they could be in negative equity for a couple years as they start up their business, right? They have a lot of expenses, but they expect profit sometime in the future. So let's say we have some government spending going to households. So we'll call this government spending. We'll make it gov spending. And so what does government spending do from the perspective of banks? Well, it increases their reserves. And we'll get to where reserves come from, et cetera, in a bit. So what we do, we just put it in this cell right here. Government spending is increasing reserves of commercial banks. But remember, I said this is spending to households. And as you can see at the end of the line, we don't have a double entry here. The system is indicating that we need to enter somewhere else. Well, what you get in your bank account isn't fiat money. It isn't like the reserves that banks hold with the central bank. And of course, reserves could consist of notes and cash, like physical pieces of paper as well. What you get in your account is bank money, commercial bank money. And banks create that out of thin air. And this is part of the MMT statement that when a government spends, money is created. Well, commercial bank money is created. So what happens? The check is going to your house. Your bank gets reserves from government spending, but they got to give you something. So what they give you is commercial bank money. And in this case, they just mark up that account automatically. So we'll increase it, and it balances that spending operation. Governments also tax you, of course, right? So we can have some government tax. So we got government tax. What does this do? Well, it's the complete opposite of what government spending is. So we can say it reduces reserves, right? And it's going to reduce your bank account. And put a minus sign there to indicate that it's subtracting. So when the MMT crowd says, well, government spending is destroying money, it is technically destroying commercial bank money. So the liabilities here, this is created by banks entirely. And they create it through loans. They create it when they get extra reserves from government spending, et cetera, et cetera. So that gets destroyed and the reserves go down. But this is a mutually exclusive flow. It's going to go somewhere else. And I'm going to show you where it goes in a minute. So we can close this. And we're going to put this into editor mode. So we can kind of see this as it gets built out. Right? I'll hide this. And so as you can see, I want to make another important nuance because there was a few comments about, well, why isn't it showing debits and credits? Minsky, you can have the minus or the plus. I've got it in the debit or credit mode. So when you're looking at this edit window, it shows if it's a debit or if it's a credit. Now, it's important to understand because it gets a little confusing with accounting is if it's an asset, your asset, and it goes up, it's a debit. Right? And that's why you call your debit card a debit card, right? So, and that's why you call your credit card, which is a liability to you, a credit card, right? So if your asset goes up, it's a debit. If it goes down, it's a credit. If you have a liability, much like a credit card, if it goes up, you get a credit. If it goes down, you get a debit. So we've got this one balance sheet, but how does this interact with the government when it spends? Well, we need a bank between commercial banks to the government. That is the central bank. So we grab another Godley table. You know what we should do is just name it right away, and we'll call it central bank. This is your central bank. We'll open it up. We'll start interlocking these balance sheets. Well, there was a stock of reserves that was an asset for commercial banks. It's got to be a liability for somebody else. And it's a liability of the Fed or the central bank. Now you can see the spending operations here, but they got to go somewhere else. So we're going to create another liability stock. That liability stock is going to be the Treasury account. So this is the federal account that countries, they all have accounts with their central bank. This is going to show the mutually exclusive flow between those accounts. So if government spending happens, well, then you've got to have the Treasury account go down. So do that. Balances the row to zero. That's great. Taxing, obviously, it's going to increase the government account. And so we've balanced it right there. And of course, the central bank does carry assets. They're government securities. We can call this, we'll call this CB bonds. This is bonds, government bonds that the central banks hold. We'll get to that in a second. And of course, you've got central bank equity. And we'll get to that in a second as well. So far, looking good. But what about now this is the perspective from the central bank. What about the perspective of the Treasury itself? So we'll change this into editor mode. Maybe make these look a little nicer. Grab this. Well, let's grab another Godley table, and this will be for the Treasury. And we'll open it up. And we're going to start assigning its assets and liabilities. Well, it's got an asset already. And that's a Treasury account it holds with the central bank. So we can enter that, brings some stuff up. It also has some liabilities already against it. That's bonds that this central bank holds. And then we can call this Treasury equity. So this is the same stock. For instance, CB bonds is the same stock you saw in the central bank asset column, right? This is the same Treasury account that you saw on the liability side of the central bank. We've got to figure out, where do we double entry, bookkeep entry this? Well, it's pretty simple. We're looking at equity, right? So if government spending is decreasing the Treasury account, it's going to decrease the equity of the central authority, the federal government, etc. And you can do a quick balance the equity right here. You balance it out. And so what this is saying, and it kind of goes to the MMT argument, is that when the government goes into a negative equity, another part of the system has to go into positive equity. Well, that means we got to start looking at households, okay? Because if we close this, and we'll make this into editor mode so we can see what's going on. If we close this, that equity has gone down, let's say through government spending. It doesn't increase the equity of central banks because they're offsetting that government spending. They get an increase in an asset and in reserves, but they match it with a liability by creating a commercial bank money. It's got to become the equity of the household because it's being spent on the household. So we'll grab another Godley table, and we'll call this households. It could represent firms as well, one and the same. But for simplicity, we'll just call it households. And we'll open this up, and we'll see what's going on here. Well, we know households have an account with the commercial banks. So there, we brought that up. We could say, you know what? Households get loans. We'll cover this in a bit. So we'll say this is HH loans, household loans. Haven't covered it yet, but we'll get the stock there and we'll cover it in a bit. And then of course, HH equity. Well, this is pretty simple. This is much like the Treasury account. This is going to affect the equity of households, so we can just balance it out. And so government spending is increasing the equity of the private sector, the non-bank private sector, right? And while it's decreasing the equity of the public sector, specifically on the Treasury's balance sheet. And this is what Steve kind of covered yesterday. And we'll make this editor mode. We'll make this bigger because we're going to do some other things here. Check out what's going on the chat, see how people are doing. Can we minimize this for a bit? Probably minimize this. Let me see. We can. How's everybody doing in the chat? I know it's a Sunday. See Tony. Of course, Tony's here. I see other people here, but you're not chatting. Make sure if you got questions, put them in the chat because I'll kind of go through this sequentially, as we go through it all, right? You might have some questions. Make sure you're hitting the like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave comments underneath the video. That helps a lot going forward. So we got no questions yet, so we're going to just carry on. You can see the viewers are here. You're enthralled. I know you're enthralled by all of this accounting. It's a special thing. I get it. So let's go back to that right now. So we will maximize this screen. Come back here. What I was trying to say when Steve said, well, you should say government spending creates fiat currency. Well, it doesn't completely. There's some things that happen. And one of the main things is that a central bank creates fiat currency. Right now, we're just looking at fiat currency as reserve accounts that commercial banks hold, right? And that could include like notes, physical notes, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, we're just doing the digital entries. Well, open market operations are the way that the central bank expands the money supply, the fiat money supply, to match economic conditions. Well, how does that happen exactly? Well, we got to go back to the central bank table. And we're going to do open market operations. And so we'll call this, we'll say open market op. Make it short. What is open market operations? It's when they buy bonds from primary dealers, which are banks essentially, that hold accounts with them at the central bank. So that obviously it's going to increase the bonds that central banks have. So mark that up. They now have bonds and they are going to create reserves. This is where fiat money is created. When you have an asset and a liability, they're going to move in the same direction, right? If it's a liability and a liability, or an asset and an asset, one will go up, one will go down. It'll be mutually exclusive. But in this case, one's an asset, one's a liability. This is the act of creating fiat money, right? And what's important about this is there has to be enough reserves in the system for when the treasuries or the federal government has treasury auctions. And we can show that too. So let's just close this. We're updating here. We got to update our commercial banks first for these open market operations. Something happens here. The reserves go up, but something must go down, and that's bonds. Banks have bonds too, which they buy at primary auctions, weekly auctions, which I'll show in the next step. So we'll call this bank bonds. And this means bonds that banks own that are treasuries, like government securities. Well, that's got to go down. So we'll insert a negative flow, and that balances the row out, right? So what happens is there are how fiat money is created, which is listed as reserves here, is that commercial banks sell these government securities to the central bank. The central bank in exchange creates fiat currency. So we've got that operation marked out, but that means the Treasury now has a little bit of an issue here. So we got to interlock these appropriately. We see that the bonds that the central bank holds has gone up, and it's a liability for the Treasury. But now the Treasury has another liability, and it's bonds that banks hold, which is right here. Put it in there, balances it out, right? It's a mutually exclusive flow. One goes up, the other one goes down. One stock goes up, the other stock goes down, right? But how do government securities come into play? And this is another part where MMT says, government securities and reserve currency is one and the same. It's just another form of government money. So let's do that now. Let's have a bond auction. This happens weekly. What happens traditionally is the New York Fed and the Treasury Secretary, and this is in the States, will sit down and have weekly meetings. Now, this might have changed during the Trump era now, but if you go back to a lot of the documented stories from the financial crisis, you'll find that the New York Fed and the Treasury Secretary sat down and had weekly meetings. Henry Paulson and Tim Geithner of the New York Fed would do that. So they knew. So the Treasury Secretary is saying, this is how much we're going to be spending over the next month or so. So we need to do some Treasury auctions. Can commercial banks actually participate in these auctions, which are the primary dealers? The Fed says, yeah, sure, there's enough reserves in the system. Or there might not be enough reserves in the system. And the New York Fed says, well, that's okay. We'll go into the Treasury market and open market operations, buy some treasuries from commercial banks. That'll give them enough reserves to actually participate in the auctions. And of course, we did that operation right there with open market operations. But the bond auction, what does that do? Well, it increases the balance of the Treasury account. So I'll just copy this, and we'll paste. It increases. So they're selling these bonds, but we've got to make a double entry somewhere. And of course, primary dealers will be banks. 5 of them in the States are banks. The rest are not banks, but they all have to be settled on the Fed balance sheet. So these banks that are primary dealers over here, they're going to get a bond, right? And that's the act of government spending. It's facilitated by the Fed. But MMT says you can just cut out all these operations, say, well, they're issuing bonds, it's a form of money. And then, of course, the private sector, mainly banks, have the option to swap those out for dollars and open market operations, et cetera, or swap reserves for interest earning bonds, et cetera. So that's the act of government spending. I wanted to show that, right? Because it's important, because the Treasury and the Fed have different behavioral operations. And we got to update. You can see there's now some entries that aren't double booked. So let's do that. We'll open this up. So this is commercial banks. So they bought these bonds, but what happens? Well, the reserves that they got via open market operations by the Fed, reserves go down. So we'll put a negative flow for bond auctions, balances it out, right? So we got to cover the central bank too, because something's happening there. So the bond auction happens. This is just a liability swap on the Fed balance sheet. So reserves go down, the Treasury account goes up. And we're balanced. right? Now, this is the argument against MMT, right? And I was having it out with John Hearn yesterday on X, where he's saying, well, money's just being recycled. Well, to a degree, it is, but we've kind of gone through the operation that when the government spends, right, it's spending treasuries into the marketplace to primary dealers, essentially. The Federal Reserve's coming in, they're creating little fancy reserve notes that the banks can swap, right, making it exchangeable. And there's things you can do with reserves other than participating in bond auctions, of course, and we'll show that. We'll show how that works. See what's going on in the chat. Don't know if anything special's happening. So far, it is pretty dead here. Sunday, you guys been drinking too much or something. Go back, close this out. We're going to look at some other things, okay? We're going to look at interest on reserves. This is another important thing. The Fed is paying interest on reserves, and a new phenomenon is happening. Banks are in negative equity, but they're hiding this with an asset, right? And so in the Fed's case, they call this future liabilities, but they mark it down as an asset. So let's do interest on reserves. This is a new phenomenon since 2008. But how does this work? The Fed is literally creating. Now it can do this one of two ways. It can be making money from Treasury securities, right? And their equity can go up, or they can just simply create these new reserve interest balances. They're paying interest on reserves. So you're stacking. The more reserves there are, the more interest there is, right? So we can call this. We'll call it interest on reserves, but it will just say IOR, right? So interest on reserves, one of two ways can happen. And we'll do it a more complicated way. Let's say, so we'll go copy that. So interest on reserves increases reserve balances, but we got to do something here. So this is now negative equity. And we'll put a minus sign. This is now negative equity for the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve right now is kind of hiding that with what they're calling it deferred costs. That's what they're calling it. And so we can go another line and they'll hide this, right? They can hide this and they'll create a new column called deferred costs. Deferred costs. Cost flow, just making up names here. And how do they hide that? Well, they do this. Copy, create the asset, and then mark up the equity account. Now they're in equal equity, essentially, right? So they actually have created an asset of deferred costs from open market operation, or pardon me, from interest on reserves, and they're hiding that. You can look at that on the Fred website with all the data. That's interest on reserves, right? That's how that works. It doesn't increase the accounts of the non-bank public, just the accounts of commercial banks. Of course, we got to go into our table and update this. Interest on reserves. Okay, that's great. What happens here? It's actually a boost in the bank's equity. We can balance it over here, and it's balanced out. And that's an operation between commercial banks and central banks and has nothing to do with the Treasury account, right? And in that case, new fiat money is actually being created in absence of government spending. There's another way that fiat money can be created in the absence of government spending, and that's through the discount window. That's when a commercial bank will get a loan of reserves from the central bank. So we can do that right now. Right? We'll show this operation. First thing we're going to do, we're looking at the commercial bank balance sheet, is we're going to create a new liability. And it's called, we'll say CB loans. So commercial bank loans. This is like the discount window. Okay. And then we're going to create a new flow. And loans to banks, call it. Great. Well, what happens here? Well, it increases the reserve accounts. So if banks need a little extra reserves, they go to the discount window. If they can't get a loan from what's called the interbank market from other banks, they will get loans and pay interest. That can happen as well. But in this case, we're showing a loan from the central bank. So the reserves go up, but we got to double entry that somewhere. And that goes in the liability account of CB loans. And that increases, right? So there's now more loans, more liabilities for the bank. That's great. It's balanced out. What does it look like to the Fed? Well, we can go to the Fed. We look at the Fed chart. We can see it needs to be entered somewhere. Well, that liability, CB loans, that is for commercial banks, is an asset for the central bank. Remember, a financial asset will be a liability, a financial liability to somebody else in the system, right? So you got to pair it somewhere. Go CB loans, balances it out, right? That is another way to create fiat money, right? So government created money. And you have to keep in mind that is despite, the bond vigilantes out there and all the free market people, central banks are a creature of the federal government. Up here in Canada, it's wholly owned by the federal government. In fact, our finance minister can override the Bank of Canada governor. Down the States, it has a few more layers of insulation, but essentially, it's a department of the U.S. government. Congress signed the act into law, right? In 1913, I believe it was, right? And they've made changes to the Federal Reserve's mandate over time. Its main mandate, its dual mandate, as we all know it to be, right, is price stability and maximum employment. Right, that's the government, the U.S. government saying that is your job. If you don't complete that job, we don't really need you. We can go create another bank. Right, it is a creature of the federal government, and of course, a lot of the other operations, the unspoken operations, is that they provide a settlement system for commercial banks to settle between one another with a unified currency. Now, I've been talking about fiat money. And so I've noticed in a lot of my, X comments or my YouTube comments, people don't understand the difference between fiat currency and commercial bank money. And we created a household loans down here for households. So when you get a loan, you're not getting fiat currency. You're getting commercial bank money, right? You don't have an account with the Federal Reserve. Therefore, you cannot get a loan in new fiat money created out of thin air by the central bank. However, you can get a loan from commercial banks. So let's say you get a mortgage, right? We'll call this mortgage, right? And we'll say it's a loan just to clarify here. Excuse all my spelling, but we will make this an exercise of accounting, not spelling. And so what happens is your deposit account goes up. I don't know why I didn't add loan, right? And the liability, you now have a liability of that loan. And that goes up as well, balancing it. So now you have, a $100 loan. That's a liability for you. Of course, you've got more money here to spend it. And of course, that maybe goes to your house builder, right? Or whatever, right? Well, this shows up somewhere else. Shows up for commercial banks, right? Here's that loan, right? But for them, that liability is an asset for them. just like the discount window loan I showed you for the commercial banks and the central bank, right? It's the same operation, but this is commercial bank money, right? Not reserve monies. And notice here, I didn't have to do anything reserves for the bank to create money out of thin air. It just does it, right? If it needs to settle with another bank, because let's say you are buying a house, your home builder has another bank branch, a different company, and so you pay them. Well, you don't have, your bank doesn't have an account with that home builder, so they use their reserves and settle with another bank that does have the account for that home builder, right? And this was part of the argument George Selgin and Steve Keynes were having, right? So, yes, we use reserves to settle between banks, but no, the act of a loan comes out of the desire of banks to be profitable. Remember, they're creating these loans, they're going to charge interest, right? So, this is the same as with the central bank. We'll do it here for your interest on loans. Interest on loans. What happens here? This is the bank's profits. Make a copy. Well, it's going to lower the deposits of their account holders. It's going to increase their equity, their cash equity. And banks can use this now, right? They're getting interest on reserves, right? You can use that and go and pay their workers, build a new bank, etc., etc. And of course, this is going to show up because you and I paid this interest. It's just going to reduce our equity altogether. Balance our equity, balances it, right? And that's the difference between fiat money and bank created money. I think Steve likes to call it bombed. So bank originated money and debt. In the post-Keynesian realm, they call this endogenous money. So it's created endogenously in the system, per se. So we'll stop sharing there. I think I went to a little more detail there, and I'll just close that out. Yes. No, we don't want to do that. Stop sharing. I'm back on the screen. It's going to be the deadest chat in history. Everybody who's here, say hello. You guys are quiet, right? I can see the statistics on the screen just on YouTube alone. We've got, 16 people. You're not chatting. I don't even know if you're here. You're lurkers. We got 21 people on X just lurking. But I wanted to, get that point across, that there's more detail than just, the government spends, that creates money. There are operations behind it. But if you aggregate it all, right, you can just say, the government auction, when it releases treasuries, that's the creation of money right there. Of course, we don't run around trading treasuries, and that would be the argument against MMT. And MMT doesn't deny the fact that the Fed comes in, that there are policies to keep the Treasury account from never going into overdraft. So the Fed creates reserves. Those reserves satisfy the settlement needs of commercial banks. It also satisfies the needs of primary dealers to say, look at all these reserves we have. We only get a floor and interest on reserves. We could earn more if we go buy a government security. It'll have a higher yield generally, right? And the Fed's always trying to match and target that. And so we got these free reserves. We might as well go and purchase some government securities, right? So there's a lot more nuance there. And of course, the other argument I was making, and this was outside of Steve and I, we completely agree on everything, is that when you purchase a bond or I purchase a government security, that's a secondary market thing, right? So yes, you're using some of your commercial money, right? But what happens is your bank account just gets marked down, right? The government doesn't get any of that commercial bank money. It needs to be settled in reserves. And this goes back to my thread. I did a blog post, etc., that shows it has to be settled with reserves, which are exclusively created only by the Federal Reserve in the U.S.'s case, right? And if we consider central banks to be creatures of federal governments, which they are, they're signed into charters, right? They're given mandates of the federal government. That means the government's funding itself, right? There's a lot of operations in between to distort that and obfuscate from that reality. But that's what's occurring in the first instance. And we'll just check out what's going on here on Twitter X Twitter. All right. And see what's going on here. And I see, okay, so I see the chats going on, but I don't actually see it in my interface, guys. So that is problematic for me. So I can go look at YouTube. And for some reason, my interface, it is just not connected today with the chat, which is unfortunate. I'm going to hide, close, but I can go look. So I'll look at the actual chat on YouTube, for instance. And I'm this sucks that it didn't come through and I didn't see this going on. So Deer Point, hello. Sorry, I missed your message. I saw Tony. You're like the only person in those messages. Rob Pierce in the house. I'm not allowed to say in the house anymore. My, somebody said I can't say that anymore. So Rob Pierce is on board. Reagan Boy Chuck is on board. D Django Geek, yo. Frank Parrott, Alex Jenkerson is around. John Lennon, good to see you. I really wish this would show up on my interface. Stefanitza 27. I don't know if I get that right or not. Right. And so now I've missed all the questions. And see if my interface is working. This is heartbreaking, to be honest. This is quite heartbreaking why this isn't working. I don't know what you guys see. Okay, so I do see, and that comes in at 142. So it is starting to work now, I think. That is bizarre. So if you have any questions and I miss them, I'll go through the YouTube interface, but then I can't put them on screen. What a heartbreaking situation. Alex Jenkinson, that was a lot of words, Ty, but what are you saying we should do next week? Cut or stick? Are you talking about rates? And so my opinion on rates, if that's what you're talking about, is we should stick. All right. There's no, for one, rates don't move the needle. There's so many endogenous things in the system. Rates aren't going to do anything next week. They wouldn't help any supply issues due to tariffs. I'm not a fan of ZERP, to be honest, quite frankly, right? You got to remember, a policy rate is like a base rate for banks, right? Banks are in it for money, right? And it's part of an operational system. I'm not advocating 20% interest rates. I'm not advocating all that much movement in the policy rate at all. I think it's used, central banks use it as a meaningful tool to the public. Look we're doing something month to month. We're changing the rate. A steady rate that businesses are used to and know the cost of it is probably best for stability in the system. If the economy's generally really, really overheating, yeah, sure, mark up the rate, but you don't have to mark it back down on the. Every time you hear a piece of news, you hear it, and we got to drop rates or we got to rise rates. The Fed, the Open Market Committee, is listening to that, right? So there's a political aspect where they're moving these rates. So I would say hold, but I know 100% it's going down. So I'm glad my chat thing is working now. Okay, so I'm seeing, the chat. Greetings to our fellow friends on X Twitter. Yes, greetings. I wish this was working earlier. This is so disappointing that that wasn't working. So I got to figure out the questions I missed in the chat because there was some there. Bud, how you doing, Bud? Have you read Robert Murphy's critique of David Graeber's debt and the back and forth they had a decade ago? Yes, I have. If you have a specific question where I stand, I give you a position. I'm on David Graeber's side. I like Bob Murphy. I've done live streams with him. Great guy, really good guy, but completely disagree with the libertarian view on money. This is the way it is. But that's not a modeling thing. So I actually put over a blog. This kind of relates to it. It's on my Patreon right now. So you can go to patreon.com/relearning economics. And I talk about wealth, right? And wealth is a very complicated thing in economics because each school has a different definition of it, right? And I'm writing a book right now. And I realized I needed an early chapter on it, right? A real big expose of what wealth is to the different economic schools, right? So it is, I've written a chapter and I also did a summary blog on my opinions of wealth, right? And I do include, the marginalist perspective, the Austrian perspective, on it. And what my argument is at the end of the day, each piece is, each theory is a component of that wealth. Or we can say that, we shouldn't be just saying wealth anymore. We should just give it, the marginalist money, right? Because they're different, often talking past each other because they're just different things, right? Wealth means different things to different people and different schools. I suggest you check it out. But yes, I have seen Bob's critiques of David Graeber. Stefanitza, 27. I think I got it right. 2019. I was at Bowen. Worked on the F-15, converting old 2D files to 3D models. Tell me more. What does that mean exactly? Dr. T. How you doing, Dr. T? Yeah, David Graeber's great. I put a lot of quotes on my X with him. Legendary guy, right? Frank. Selling treasury bonds creates money, but isn't money that was previously created that was previously created used to purchase them? Yeah, previously created by the Fed, right? By buying treasury assets. There is an origin story, guys, and I didn't do this in my I wish I did. So when the Fed started, and this goes the same with all other central banks generally, but the Fed, it's well documented. How it started is it was given some gold, right? And they created certificates. And that was part of their initial asset base. They also had a ton of commercial banks out in the US economy. And those banks had specific assets themselves that were given to the Fed as part of their asset base. And so there was that original asset base the Fed had, right? But altogether, the Fed initially created reserves. So in exchange for those assets from commercial banks, the commercial banks got an account with the central bank, the Fed, and it was loaded up with a certain amount of reserves. And that's the origin story. But we weren't talking about the origin story. We're just talking, operations over the last 75 years, long after the origin of the Federal Reserve, right? And that's entirely done by the Fed purchasing treasuries from commercial banks. And when they do that, they create the reserves in the commercial bank accounts. Those reserves are then used in normal settlement operations between banks because the economy is moving. But some of those commercial banks, 5 of them in the US's case, are primary dealers. They take those reserves and they're like, wow, these are free. I got to offload some old, inefficient treasuries that I couldn't sell for a markup, a capital gain. And you know what? There's some new treasuries out there earning a better yield, and I'd like to buy them. And you've just given me free reserves. Well, thank you. I'm going to go participate in the treasury auction, which they are mandated to be part of the 28 primary dealers that participate in auctions. They are mandated to actually go participate. And even if there's outside primary dealers, which are allowed, and it has grown over the years, they're using the primary dealer as a broker, right? And the primary dealers that don't have accounts with the Fed have to then go to the primary dealers with the Fed to settle in reserves, right? And the reserves are entirely created by the Fed, right? And if you take the MMT position that the Fed, central banks, and federal governments are one and the same, i.e., the central bank is a department of the federal government with some extra independence, then it's self-funding. Right. And that's what we kind of looked at through that balance sheet. Alex, the natural interest rate has been rising. There's no such thing as a natural interest rate, buddy. It's a construct of economic models. There's no such thing. You actually have to create the model to give you a natural. There's nothing natural in economics, right? That's just constructs of models. There is no natural interest rate. I actually did, and let me see if I can find this blog. A while ago, it might have been a thread, a Twitter thread or an X thread. Let me see if I can find it. And I actually wrote a chapter in my new book about it. So long ago. I'm looking for it, guys. Stand by. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2. Should I turn on the fancy music? A lot of scrolling here. I forget what I even titled it. It seems like it was a long time ago. Can't find it. But I did cover it, and I think it might have actually been a Twitter thread where I dissected the idea, and it was. Let me look that up, because I think it's important to bring that up. Maybe I'd never wrote a blog on it at all. It was quite some time ago. Look at my bookmarks before I start losing viewers here looking for something. I addressed it as the natural rate of interest. And I feel quite clever that I wrote it, but I can't find it. I can't find it right now. I'm going to have to, you know what? If you comment, Alex, in the comments, then I can post a link to you. Just say, hey, did you find that what you were looking for? I just don't want to waste time on the stream looking for something. But post in the comments, and then I'll send you a link. It was either a Twitter thread or it was one of my blogs. I just can't remember right now. What else is going on here? Reagan, fellow Canadian. Can others see my questions? Ty doesn't seem to see them though my phone died. Did I miss his answer? Well, there's so many questions. I might not have even gotten to your question. I think everybody can see you. Can everybody see Reagan's post? Because if I look I can see you on YouTube. I would assume everybody else can see you, Reagan. I don't know what your question is. I probably just missed it. Right, Bud. I love the name, Bud. Bud, you're probably of the Austrian side of things, considering you brought up Bob Murphy, but it's good to see you here. I've got appreciation for all economics. I lean to certain sides every once in a while. there's things that I don't like about all economics, really. With the post-Keynesians, MMT Austrians, I critique it all, but there are pieces that I really like. Like I like the idea of the Austrian business cycle. I think it's fascinating, right? I don't know if the emphasis on the Federal Reserve manipulating the rate is the main driver of the business cycle, but it's definitely a component of it. And that's why I was arguing earlier that we should actually try to keep that as stable as possible. Isn't natural in economics just another word for regularities and recurrent tendencies in a complex system, like the economy? Well, that's kind of like aperiodic or periodic cycles. So the economy is a complex, nonlinear dynamic system. So there's nothing natural going on there, right? It's path dependent, and it's based on its initial conditions. So if you're modeling it mathematically, you're going to set a bunch of parameters and a bunch of different levels for your stocks. Um, you get a complex system. I don't know. There's nothing natural about it. You shouldn't even use that word, right? It's a confusing word. Natural means something, a natural phenomenon in nature. And interest rates, which are set institutionally, there's nothing natural about that, right? That's part of an institutional structure, right? There's nothing natural, right? There's no even a natural rate of market rates. It's institutional. Commercial bank looks at a specific customer and says, well, you're credit worthy. Okay, I like this idea. I can get a house on collateral. I like this idea. There's nothing natural about that. There's a bunch of institutional norms and rules, right? So the word it's a terrible. And so in economics, and especially neoclassical economics and their DSGE models, they actually produce a natural rate of unemployment, but it's produced after the fact by running the model and isn't a thing that appears in actual society itself. It's a fiction, right? And that's what I was really referring to. We see you, Reagan. We see you. Can regulators create currency by placing jurisdiction in negative equity? I need more nuance to that question. Can regulators, what regulators, right? And what is jurisdiction in negative equity? I need a little more info on that one. Graham, good to see you, Graham. Is there a limit to the equity a commercial bank can hold before it moves to its reserves with the central bank? I need a little more nuance to that. The equity of commercial banks, there's no limit. Commercial, like I was saying early on, I don't know if you were in the stream or not, but the main operation in financial businesses is that they're in positive equity, right? If they're in negative equity, a bank, they're out of business, right? So their assets, their short-term assets will always exceed their short-term liabilities. But maybe give some more clarification on that. Oh, the R star. Yeah, it's terrible. Listen, there is here's this question. There is a natural rate. It's called R star. If you don't consider R star, you can't understand the Fed funds rate, because they too operate. Some of the models do, but it's a fiction, is what I'm trying to say. It's created by models itself. It's not a natural rate, right? It's an institutional model. It's nothing natural about it, right? So it's a fiction. I'll go find I'll have to find the post now. Driven me to look through my endless Twitter feed. It was a couple months ago. I think in August. Actually, I can just search. I can use their crappy natural rate. Pretty sure that should bring up. Oh, that's not on my profile. Let's try this. Search on the profile. There we go. Natural rate. You figure I'd find it by now. I remember I did a whole thread on it. I can't remember what I named it. Interest rate. Oh, debunking the natural rate of interest. I don't think I ever actually wrote a blog, but let's share this screen. And we'll go through it, and it'll be my explanation. Share. And we'll make everything big here. We'll get rid of the chat for a second. And so what I said, and this is kind of a full thread, the natural rate of interest, R star, is a concept in monetary policy, yet it has no empirical anchor. It is observed in data, but not inferred in models and assume equilibrium. This is backed up by Luchbach and Williams in 2023, Holton in 2017. R star assumes investment responds to interest rates and savings results from intertemporal choice. But savings largely reflects income, and investment is driven by expected demand. Of course, found some papers to back that up. 1988, Godley and Cripps, 1983. R star is an estimate by reverse engineering models with rational expectations. You guys know what I think about rational expectations. The result is circular. Central banks justify rate changes using unobservable numbers embedded in their own models. This is backed up by Cochrane in 2016 and the IMF in 2014. Interest rates don't steer the economy towards equilibrium. They redistribute income, affect public debt service, and shift financial prices. They are physical and financial levers, not natural guides. And of course, that was I was reading a paper by Taylor in 2020, and even Summers. I read a paper where he also agrees that it is a big load of baloney. There is no natural anchor. Interest rates are policy choices with distributional and macroeconomic consequences. The fiction of R star depoliticizes deeply political decisions. Lavoie, 2014, Colder, 1958, Merlin, 2012. And I posted links to all those studies. So I'll go back to this and I will stop sharing that. In fact, I will turn that one right up. Can I delete that? Buttons, removed source. So that's kind of my opinion, basic opinion. It's the natural rate as it's documented. R star is a construct of models, right? You're working. So general equilibrium models work backwards. You solve them literally backwards, right? And it's a feature of those models. There's nothing natural about it, right? And trust me, the central bank doesn't always move with the R star model, right? Which is a general equilibrium model. There's a lot of factors. You can look at the CDO website, I believe it's called, right? And it looks at like the probabilities of rate changes, which is pretty interesting. What else do we got here? Yes, I agree, Dr. T. Rational expectations are definitely empirically false. I put out a tweet the other day saying if people had rational expectations, casinos would go out of business. Now, of course, I was being sarcastic to a degree, but you got to understand the only thing rational about people is that they are actually rationally irrational. Geez, I sounded like Faulkner there, or Greenspan doing some Fed speak there. The only thing rational about humans is they're irrational, right? That's the only rational expectation I have for humans. But yeah, I put that tweet out. It was pretty funny. Are you a supporter, Matt? Are you a supporter of DSG modeling? General equilibrium modeling? So I'm not. That's why I use system dynamics, right? Nonlinear. But you can do nonlinear modeling and DSG modeling, but it's so hard and intensively, like computationally intensive. They don't do a lot of it, and it's they don't like doing that. I've watched this convention on DSGE modelers talking about it. But I'll tell you, no system is optimized to go back into an equilibrium. That's like if you're studying the heart and you're just looking at equilibrium situations. That means you're looking at dead bodies. It's kind of foolish. Right? I find it's, equilibrium analysis was great for the 1900s because they didn't have any other tools. You didn't have I have a great computer right now that I can do things on nonlinear complex modeling, so system dynamic modeling, that it would have taken a supercomputer in the 1950s to do. That filled up a whole room, right? So we just have the tools now that, DSG modeling it's dinosaur stuff. It really is. And if you look at the results of 2008 and you look at the results of 2020, those models just don't work. So they work if the world was in equilibrium, but the world isn't in equilibrium. Right? It does pass through different equilibrium points. So in nonlinear complex systems, you have attractors and repellers, or strange attractors, they call them, right? And then you look at like the Lorentz system, right? And you have 3 equilibrium points, right? And some are attracting and then they'll repel, right? And you get that butterfly shape, right? That's the type of math that I like to do. So I stay away from the difference equations and I step into the ordinary differential equations. What else is going on? Okay, well, what did the Django Geek say? See what the conversation is going on here. Treasuries and reserves are 2 sides of the same coin. One is issued by the Fed, the other is issued by the Treasury. One is tradable, one is not. One is used for settlement, the other is not. That is an accurate description of the situation. Now, Django Geek, would you agree that from an MMT perspective, they're both money, right? They're just different compositions of money. And the composition of money in the economy can change because of open market operations. So I think Django Geek and I were probably on the same page on that whole operation I gave at the beginning of the live stream. I'd do it again, but it's too long and I don't want people to leave because they already saw it. But Matt, equilibrium analysis arrived precisely when the conditions of its possibility vanished. It arrived when big business and modern corporations arose. Of its possible truth. Okay. So you're saying they're useless now in a modern economy? Frank and Django are having a very intellectual. Oh, hold on, Matt. You got Clippy. You got Clippy as your PFP. I saw that on a YouTube video. Some guys advocating that you should just use the Clippy. Are you using it in protest? Just out of curiosity. Reagan? I don't know. 5th time a charm. Can regulators create currency by issuing licenses that place public in negative? I told you got to nuance that question better because I don't know what you're talking about. Right, you're gonna have to add more detail because they're just words. What regulators? Right? By issuing licenses. What licenses? That place public in negative equity. Well, the Treasury is in negative equity in most countries, right? In the U.S. and Canada, the federal Treasury is in negative equity. I need a little more nuance there. Zoe, I don't know if I said hi or not. How does the composition of money impact on real economic activity? I think the argument is the supply of deposits adjusts in response to economic activity. Correct. And so this is what I tell a lot of people, right? And it doesn't matter if you're post-Keynesian, MMT, or Austrian, neoclassical. The central bank, this is the hidden thing behind, price stability and maximum employment, is they are targeting economic activity. So they want to see reserve balances match economic activity. And out of that, you can get a Fed funds rate. And of course, now they can strain it because you got your floor, interest on reserves, and you've got your discount window, which is essentially your ceiling, right? So the Fed funds travels in between that, and the level of the balances in the overall banking system would dictate how it travels in that channel. But that is correct. So the reason that composition would make an impact is because it's trying to match economic activity, right? That's the most important thing, right? Um, we saw that, like, so the economic activity comes in different forms. So you got the real economy, like the goods and services need to be traded between households, firms, business to business transactions. Then you got the financial sector, and we saw in 2008 why they flooded with QE reserves is because they wanted banks to lend to each other again, right? Banks were not very comfortable with lending even to other big, well-established banks, and that was the initial purpose of QE, right? Was to flood the system with reserves. Of course, there was ideas that through that would also increase lending. So, well, banks weren't lending to each other during 2008. They certainly weren't lending to households. The idea was, well, you got more reserves. That means there'll be more lending to households. Turned out that didn't work out at all, right? Because settlement balances or reserves don't dictate credit issuances. What dictates that is the profitability for banks, right? They will issue a loan, create commercial money before they even think about settling it with another bank, right? They want to make a profit, but that's another story. Okay, I've got some more nuance from Reagan here. Oil and gas give away licenses to produce resources to foreign shareholders who don't own the resources. License is private asset and legal collateral for money creation. Unless cleanup is mandated and free money. Well, the oil and gas corporations can't make money. They can make commercial paper. They can't issue credit like banks can, which are legally allowed to do that. They can't issue fiat money. Oil and gas give away licenses to produce resources to foreign shareholders who don't own the resources. You need more. Okay, here's some more from Reagan. Let's try to unpack this. $150 billion a year in Canadian credit creation goes to U.S. owners, bitumen and pipeline companies. Canadians repay those loans with tomorrow's production of Canadians' resources. Trillions of dollars free lunch. Yeah, well, I think what you're trying to say here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we allow foreign companies to come in and extract our oil. They'll operate here, they'll get loans here, they'll act like a company. They have shareholders that are abroad, they'll send back dividends to that. And then you might be, I guess, alluding to an environmental aspect, right? And that could be true. That's your field of study, Reagan. I wouldn't exactly know because I haven't researched it a lot, but I think I'm getting what you're saying there. I guess you're asking, is that that's more of a normative statement than a positive statement of mechanical operations. Is that good or is that bad? I think we're at a point in reality that from a normative perspective, it's probably not a good thing. Environmentally, it's probably not a good thing for the Canadian public, where we should derive more benefit from the resources that are extracted from our own country versus foreign shareholders. So from a normative perspective, yeah, sure, that's problematic, and policy can change that, right? That's a policy thing, not an economic. The economics is the business of it, right? But the bound economic, microeconomic operations, you need solid policy from the government. And if the public wants that, they vote in a government, you would think that would support something like that, right? But we all know that politics isn't always efficient at a modern age. You know that, Reagan, with your attempt there a few years ago. Fortunately, the parties that should get more attention in the realm of those issues don't get the media attention, right? So I agree, like on a normative issue, yeah, it's problematic. What else we got here? No, Tony. Tony. No, the Canadian government issues the licenses. It doesn't matter if they are Canadian or foreign. Your issue is, are the Canadians getting paid for their resources? Yeah, and I think that's what we just kind of discussed there. And of course, Tony's from Australia, so he's looking at Canada and Australia like mere countries. One's just in the southern hemisphere, and one's in the northern hemisphere. We're both resource extracting countries that we send our resources abroad. We have the same problem in Australia with getting foreigners to pay us for our resources. Yeah. Dr. T. Ty, Nixon was awful by destroying pseudo gold standard was good. Yeah, I guess. Listen, so I never look at it like the gold standard and the regulatory policies with it in connection to fiat currency creation has been eroded. Right, over time, each crisis that comes along, they disconnect it a little bit more. But at the end of the day, central banks still hold gold as an asset, right? So the gold bugs out there, rest assured, central banks still want gold, right? Gold will still have value. But as it bringing the idea that a gold standard brings financial stability, well, we had gold standards and metal standards in the 19th century, and we had banking crises every 5 years, right? And bouts of massive deflation and then bouts of massive inflation every couple of years. So I don't know. The empirical evidence shows that it didn't really work out, right? But that's another story, of course. Tony, yes, there are differences between Canada and Australians. Canadians have snow and freeze their asses off. We have sunshine, beaches, and lots of fun. We have sunshine too. Like it's paradise here on the West Coast, Tony. In the summer, paradise here. Do I got to put up pictures of paradise for you? Actually, you know what? Anybody that wants to see, like, you can go to Australia and live in a desert, or find a body of water and have a crocodile eat you, or you can come to Canada, have some good maple syrup, some good beer, right? And sit on a nice sunshine beach. And you know what? If it's a little towards winter, go up, ski, do some skiing. We got big mountains here. You got mountains there, Tony, with snow? Actually, was Tony, you probably saw this news story. They got snow in this little town in Australia, and all the kids were playing. It was like last year or something. And so the kids were all excited because they'd never seen snow in their life, right? And it was a real big deal. I don't know if you know what town that was in, Tony. Anyways, what else do we got? Climate change may reverse that, Tony. Yeah. Agreed. Just scrolling through all, I want to see it. I'm really disappointed that I missed the chat in the early parts. Doing my little doodad on reserves. I think I've covered everything, right? We're just going to end up going off the rail. So if you got any questions left, hit me up. Or if you just disagree with something I'm saying, battle me on it. I'll be like, well, I don't want to say this, but I'll be like Charlie Kirk, right? He would go into universities. We all know what he did, right? But he would debate people. And even it was kind of like his thing, right? To debate, the left and, crush them, right? I'll even do that. I don't want to crush you, and I don't want anything bad to happen to my neck or anything like that. But if you disagree with me on something, please tell me in the chat. I like that. As long as you articulate what you're disagreeing with, so I understand it, because it's, if you put random words, I might not understand. Zoe, in a previous stream, you argued long-term rates result from central bank policy, QE and QT. When Liz Truss introduced unfunded tax cuts in the UK, this caused rising borrowing costs, and she blames the Bank of England. No, it's so the Bank of England has a choice to either enter a market, and it always enters the short-term market, but during QE, it entered the long-term market, and it can overwhelm and swamp the market. There is no bond vigilantes at that point. Or the central bank can choose, because of policy, to step back. And so if Liz Truss introduced something that spooked markets, markets will react temporarily. But ultimately, there is a bit of an artificial anchor to the short-term rates for long-term rates. And you can just look at the data, right? You'll see divergences on daily news, but once that daily news ends, right, it diverges back to that trend with the short end rates, plus a markup on duration. So longer duration securities, obviously that increases the risk premium, right? So that gap will always exist, but they essentially move in tandem if you remove all the market noise from, like, say, 10-year yields and 30-year yields, right? So I would disagree with Liz Truss blaming the BOE for causing it. She could say, well, it's their fault because they didn't step into the market and swamp out the alleged vigilantes and manipulate it, which the BOE can do that because they own a monopoly on the reserves in the system, and the treasuries, the federal, the UK government owns a monopoly on the treasuries, right? They own those markets. They can do whatever they want, right? It's an interaction between those two entities. Why bond vigilantes don't like hearing that? Because it takes away a sense of their control, right? In the markets, like, I'm funding the government and I control the price through supply and demand. And so it takes away the control. But they should look at it as, what the government's allowing you to do is take some of that crappy commercial bank money and purchase an interest-bearing, safe, secure security from the government, right? It's a privilege you have as an individual. If you're UKer and you got the pound, right? Now you can go get an interest earning asset, right? Equivalent to that pound. Be a, little certificate in the old days. Now your broker will show you a balance, but so in that case, and I know UKers have a lot of problems with you guys are going through political leaders like sliced bread right now. So many. I've really liked, what's that weird haircut guy? Boris. What was his name? He's gone through so many now. He was like 3 or 4 ago. He was funny. He was like the Donald Trump of the UK. Funny guy. Progressive. Could you please do a stream or a blog on why Liz Truss failed? Because her initial goals seem to be quite progressive to me. I'd have to, because I'm a Canadian, I look at a lot of my research goes into, the big bad US. I'd have to look into it more. I see it because a lot of my followers on X are from the UK, so they make comments, but generally, if it's not to do with BOE policy, I don't really know a lot about the politics of Britain, other than it's a parliamentary system, other than there's not a lot of stability since Brexit. I'd have to do a deep dive, but I'll consider it progressive. I'm sure you've read my other blogs. Like, I'm always looking for blog or article ideas, so I'll consider it. I'll take a look into it, but I have to admit my ignorance on the topic. I wouldn't want to pretend like I know something I don't. What else do we got here? Thanks. Liz Truss is a fascinating case study of government that tried to increase deficit spending. Okay, so this is the indication I think I just got from Progressive that she was somewhat progressive, right? And maybe, and this is just me speculating here. I haven't looked at the data, but I think you were just saying the idea that the bond markets disciplined her, right? I think politics might have disciplined her, right? And I think the division in politics between left and right is so extreme right now, whether you're progressive or you're conservative. Politics can be hard, right? If we look at here in Canada, right now the Liberals got him. We chose Mark Carney. A lot of the UKers know him as the former BOE governor. He was actually the governor of the Central Bank of Canada during the great financial crisis. And we came out of that as one of the most resilient banking systems around the world. Right. And so that's where he got his job at the BOE, is because of his successes in the Bank of Canada. Anyways, he's our leader now, but we were on the verge of a conservative government in Canada. And generally the Liberals win here. And the Liberals here are center left, mostly center, and conservatives here right now, the federal conservatives they're right. They're right. And some parts of their party want to bring it to the center more to be more electable. And then we have the New Democrat Party, which is left, very left. And then we have the Greens here. And Reagan Boychuk will know all about the Greens here, right? And they're very, very, very left. Very, 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 very left. But there's so much division right now. So any politician is susceptible to mob mentality, right? Even a couple years from now, Donald Trump might not have an easy life. Right. He might be sowing the seeds of his destruction. Maybe he has a heart attack from eating too much McDonald's or something like that. I don't know, but he might be sowing the seeds of his destruction now, right? Because we live in that political where things are turning on a dime. And so the political calculus in each election cycle snapping back and forth. I have this postulate that we may be in a period for a while where we see one-term presidents for a while. It was very rare to see Trump one term, Biden one term, now Trump again. Now we'll see what Trump does, but we're just in that climate right now. Yeah, I even think it's a little worse than the 1960s. But anyways, I got to look into Liz Truss before I can write about her. What else do we got? Dr. T. My local MP needs armed police support. I shouldn't laugh at that, but yeah, it's political violence is not the answer to a healthy democracy. That's all I got to say about that. Alex. The problem with the UK is our short-term mortgages and our people panic if rates go up because they will lose their houses. And in brackets that they can't really afford. Yeah. This is a tough one, isn't it? So there's two sides to that coin. Like one part of it, and I'm sure even Alex, I think you're more on the right side of things. Like you're more right-leaning, I think. Or maybe you're centrist like me. There's the progressive side that we want everybody to have a home. And that's an idealistical goal to strive for. But the reality is that you have to contribute in society. All right. And if you can't afford something and then the bank is predatory about its lending practices and puts you in a bad position just so they can acquire the real asset after the fact, that's problematic too. Right. But there has to be some responsibility to the person themselves. On their financial realities. So it's a tough noodle to crack, as our population grows and there's only so much land, right? So you got to build different forms of housing that people can buy. Maybe it's more condos, et cetera, et cetera. I see this is very prominent here in Vancouver, BC in Canada, right? Housing crisis, very high prices and stuff. So It's a tough noodle to crack. And some people here just, relegate it to renting. I'll actually pay a higher rent than a mortgage, monthly mortgage. But in that sense, there's no down payment. You could say, well, they can save that down payment for other things like retirement, right? And just live that life. Make sure you sign into a good lease with a landlord, maybe a 5-year lease, so you have some stability, right? Question from Django Geek. If there's 100 million in base money and the government wants to run a deficit of 120 million, where does the extra 20 million come from? Well, it comes through Treasury auctions. And then you'll say, well, where does the reserves come from for the primary, dealers to purchase? Well, it comes from the Fed. You say, well, who is the Fed? Well, it's a pseudo arm of the federal government. And then you go a little bit further, and you realize the money comes from the government. But a lot of people don't want to hear that, because then they go into the extreme MMT. I don't claim to be an MMTer, but the accounting just matches that reality. It's not magic. It's not the printer go brr. It's just always been that way. That's just the way it is, right? So on the stream on Friday, Steve likes to simplify it and say, well, the government's suspending it into existence. When I built my national model, I couldn't just do that. I had to actually build the stocks and flows to make it a stock flow consistent model. And I had to go through all those processes. So I know Reagan's mad at it because I just said something about housing. Not irresponsible borrowers. Like I said, I put it on the banks for being predatory. There's a component of it. But we're all required to educate ourselves, right? We don't live in this fluffy world where you get an excuse not to know things, right? And say the man is always holding me down, right? Yeah, life sucks. Life is tough. The strong generally survive and the weak don't. And we haven't moved that far beyond the plains of Africa, right? We're not that far. We're like 3 crises away from slipping into anarchy on our planet. We have institutional built around us, right, to give the facade of an advanced world. And we have technology and AI. But at the end of the day, everybody still needs to have some responsibility of their own, right? Everybody has to avoid their own temptations, right? That's a responsibility for every individual, right? So there is a bit of an onus on the loanees, right? But I will say, Reagan, like I said before 5 minutes ago, predatory lending practices by banks is wrong. That's morally wrong too, right? And they hold a responsibility, right? Because people can be, even the smartest, well-founded people, they can be in desperate situations. Maybe they just had a young kid and they really want their first home, but they just aren't generating that income right now. And maybe they need to rent for another 5 years and try to squirrel away a down payment, really get their finances in order, make sure their child's taken care of. It could be any number of things. But the dream to own your own home with a small family is so tempting, and to wave a false carrot in front of them, that's wrong. I get that, right? But what I'm trying to say is we all have responsibilities, right? And we all have to acknowledge them. We can't blame everything on something else for our decisions, right? As tough and as unfair as life is, that's the reality, right? There are lots of things that I want, guys. I do not have. I want some better lights, but I can't afford them. I have Chinese lighting systems. They are nice. They are nice big soft boxes, and they do light me up really well. And this isn't Chinese. This is American made. I put a lot of money into this little light bar. But we all have responsibilities, right? Including me. And I can't do some things, right? And sometimes it really sucks because I see like the Elon Musk out there, like, and the one that flies to space? Was it Bezos? Like, what makes them so important that they get to do those things and have the luxuries, what financial freedom gets you? It's frustrating to see, but we've always lived in that world. And I don't think we're far enough along as a society where we can get into the Star Trek realm, right? Where we're past the post-scarcity part of, human evolution. We're not there yet, right? So I'm just very realistic in the reality of we have to take some personal responsibility, despite the fact that life is unfair. That's my thoughts about that. Alex, AI will be smarter than humans by 2030, according to some experts I watch. Are they rich experts like Elon Musk? Mr. Jenkinson, did you get sold some snake oil by a rich billionaire? Mr. Jenkinson. Should we turn on the music? Let's turn on the music. Let's turn on cinematic. See what it sounds like. Is out there. Fox Mulder and Dana Scully go on a path of exploration on the X-Files. Okay, I'll stop doing that. Only once per show I'll do that. It's back to the chat. I love seeing you guys every stream I do. We really have fun. Even if we battle it out a bit, it's fun. It's a good exercise for the brain. Where did I see it? So not Tony. I'll get to you, Tony. I'm not going to talk to people who don't understand sovereign money. I look out for my own mental health. I think that kind of reiterates your own personal responsibility, right? Gotta learn for yourself and make decisions for yourself, right? And even if the world's not fair around you, you've got to make your own choices. My co-op proposal may help, but I'm not getting much support so far. Yeah, and I know that's why you want me to reach out. It's just I have so much work. I'm writing a book. I'm writing recording a workshop series, right? I've got my modeling with modern macro technology. It's I'm just, busy as all get out to take on any more projects. But if anybody's out there, let me say this name right. Stefanitsia 27 has a proposal. So if anybody's interested in collaborating with her, reach out to her in the comments. Maybe you guys can get something going. What else do we got here? We got Frank and Django. Gavin, have I seen you here today? I believe that Canada is reaching credit exhaustion right now. I think private debt, the private debt to GDP ratio just crossed 170 in Canada. Pretty sure I heard that on the news the other day. The difference between, Canada and the U.S. with private debt to GDP ratios is Canada has a lot of fiscal support, right? So it's got a lot of social programs, right? So we can support a higher debt to GDP ratio, private debt to GDP ratio than the U.S. The U.S. got up to 200, I think, around 2008, 2007. It was a disaster for them, right? So, but yeah, maybe we are right now. We got to see how things play out, the economy, with tariffs and Trump. It's like, I wish we could all just kind of press the pause button until Trump is no longer around. We can get back to business. Maybe. What else we got here? We getting into some physiocrat stuff here. You need land to get energy, Tony. Uh-oh. Tony and Alex are going to go at it. Oh, no. Should I play the epic music, guys? Come on and battle it out. I never got my answer. I never got my answer. How are you supposed to make a contribution, whatever that means, if you can't afford somewhere to live? I may have missed your original question. And I've had this philosophical discussion with people, right? Does owning a home versus renting, and we'll get to the point where you can't even rent either. Does owning a home and renting make you like, if you own a home, are you more productive as a human being contributing to society than renting a home, right? Because remember, if you're renting a home, you're not buying a new roof every 20 years, you're not buying a new hot water tank every 5 years, not replacing appliances, covering depreciation, and so you have some extra funds there where you can put towards a retirement, etc., etc. However, if you got nowhere to live and you're homeless, you're definitely not going to be contributing to society, and that's problematic. And this is where I agree with government spending and social programs that would make the right people on the right call me an extreme leftist woke, even though I just feel like taking care of people collectively is a good idea. That's where I'm progressive and on those issues. I don't know your original question, but that's my answer. Blair Fix. We should get Blair on one of the streams. See Blair Fix work on why the housing market moving from commodities to assets represents a theft of money from poor people. Yeah, I wonder what's the name of the article. Question. Would you ever open up the stream panel for viewers for yeah, I've thought about it. We did it once. A lot of people are shy, right? I actually did a couple years ago when we were doing the Steve Keen and Friends show. We did a version of it where you could just come on and ask your question. It reminds me of that. There's a show called the Sunday Night Sex Show with Sue Johansson. The Canadian viewers will know who I'm talking about. And the phone call, you could ring in and ask your question, right? And then Sue would tell you her expert opinion on that topic. And I've thought about it. Cameras, setting up your cameras and stuff. So maybe an audio version where you guys can just jump on audio. The problem is some people just don't know how to have the proper decorum on live stream. You can't just sit there and talk and talk and talk on somebody else's live stream, right? You got to be quick with your answers or quick with your questions and quick with your responses, and that's it, and stay on topic. Unless you're the host, then you can do whatever you want. And in that case, you should just do your own live stream, but it takes a while to build up viewers and stuff. But that is a good question and something to think about. Did Django Geek, if you have more a structure of a live stream show that we did where we did that, you should put it in the comments how you think that would work out. And I think about it, right? It's not hard with the streaming platform that I pay for. It's $50 a month. It's not hard for me to just post a link and get people to come on and talk. And that could be one of my live streams per week. But again, there's, issues that come along with that, right? And I don't want somebody to come in and say something inappropriate, right? Because I don't have a delay button, right? And so there's always that risk. I'm trying to monetize the channel. And so I know those live show call-in shows back in the day, they'd have a producer and the producer would be like, okay, what's the question you're going to ask, right? And there's a few YouTube bloopers out there where the person calling in didn't ask that question, right? But live TV had a 7-second delay, right? So those are the issues I'd have to address, right? Because somebody could say something very inappropriate, right? And how would I deal with that? But it's an interesting idea. What else do we got here? Alex, Tony, you guys growing trees now? Exactly, Tony. Trees grow where? The land. Gavin Van. I would say right now, aggregate demand is at risk due to private sector not being well supported. Yeah, we'll see what Carney's got, his bills. Here's the issue in Canada. I guess you're Canadian, right, Gavin? is we got, two issues, two federal political routes we go down. We go down the tough on crime route that doesn't really add much productivity to the economy, or we do big, spending projects, right? That do add to the economy. And it seems like Carney's got some on deck right now. I just hope he doesn't get derailed by trying to work with the other side about bail reforms and all that stupid, useless stuff. It's already just in law, right? The crime happens. It's going to happen in every country. That's the way it is. I don't, being tougher and tougher and tougher and more draconian is not making society better. So I'm just hoping that he sticks on those talking points. I know he wants to be different from Trudeau, right? So he's trying to appease to a lot of people on the right. So how bad my delay is right now. It's just a terrible delay going on. Maybe if I close some of this stuff, maybe it'll get a little bit better. What else we got here? If you had me on, I would definitely have said something inappropriate after your libertarian nonsense and your poor people being the cause of the GFC. Or is that not what you said? I didn't say poor people were the cause of the GFC. The GFC was a reaction of extreme public debt, especially in the United States, right? And then interest rates rising, right? It caused instability. Read up on Hyman Minsky. He did a lot of work in that area. Also read up on debt deflation, so leading up to, so this would, you want to look at Irving Fisher and then look up the work of Steve Keynes, who kind of tied those people together. But yeah, definitely people weren't the cause of the great financial crisis. That was definitely by the financial private sector. Libertarian nonsense. I don't know. Are you libertarian or non-libertarian? I'm not. So I don't know. Did I offend some libertarian leanings on your side? Or are you saying I'm a libertarian, which I don't know how to feel about that. Bob Murphy would be proud. What else do we got here? I like Steve's last video. What was wrong with it? Are you talking to somebody else? Oh, Steve Keen is on in 15 minutes. I didn't like his last video on houses. I like his little Sunday videos he puts out each week. Comes on in about right when I'm going to end this stream. So you guys can actually, this is my plug for Steve Keen. He is releasing a video in 13 minutes, guys. And I'm going to go watch a baseball game. Check it out. He actually started doing those a year ago. And they've been, some of them have been hugely successful for him. And I'm really, really happy that he started doing that, because 500,000 views on one of them. So hopefully he gets up to 1 million eventually. I think that's his goal, right? And this is a wider audience for heterodox economics in general, right? So it's a win for probably everybody watching me right now, that we get people like him out there more. Steve's last video, let's Mr. Jenkinson. Steve's last video was a fairy tale. Houses have never been cheaper than gold. I'd have to watch a video. I'm not even going to comment on that, Alex. I'm not going down that rabbit hole until I know what the hell he said. So I'll have to see. Ty, scroll back to what? What do you want me to scroll back to? I was joking. Okay, good. We're friends still. So you're not a libertarian, or you are a libertarian. I don't care if you're a libertarian. I don't care. Like, it's Sunday today. It's an easygoing day. Whatever floats your boat. If you're a libertarian, that's cool. If you're post-Keynesian, that's cool. If you're progressive, that's cool. I don't care. I'm glad you're here. Like chatting to you guys. I think that's about it. I think we got to the end here. We answered some questions here. Dialogue's going. I'm sorry the chat wasn't working in the beginning. Last video was one of our better streams. It was up to like 750 total views. That's highest for any of my streams in the 2 months that we've been doing it. So it's getting better and better. You can check out my latest blog. It's free on Patreon now. If you're on X, you can see that there too. It's titled, What is Wealth? And wealth is a very divisive topic in economics. So it's a good read. Check it out. Libertarian. Ew. Well, we gotta be inclusive to all. This is a problem. This is why I always, did streams with Bob Murphy and the likes, is because we got to keep the back doors open. All right, we got to keep communication, because for instance, Austrian economics is very heterodox. It's just complete polar opposites to let's say the post Keynesian theory. But they are by no means mainstream at all. Like the true Austrian, especially like the anarchy Austrian, like the Bob Murphy type. So it's good to keep the lines open between them. I try not to hate too much. And I find, a lot of those, whether they're Austrian economists or whoever, they're just on a personal level, they're generally just nice people. We're all nice people. We're all humans at the end of the day. So it is what it is, right? They care about their families. They care about their friends. They care about the world around them. They just look at it in a different way. And if we close off into our own little siloed echo chambers, we're not going to learn more about this world. We're going to isolate ourselves and cause division, and we'll self-destruct. That's how societies have self-destructed, over the ages. So it's important to, have an open dialogue, and a respectful one too. Not the Charlie Kirk, whatever style. But like an open dialogue and be friendly. Because it's Sunday today. Anyways, guys, it's fun. I will, guess I'll see you. I'll do a reaction video on Tuesday. Make sure you're hitting, sorry, I gotta take you down, Django. You're hiding the thing, right? So hit that like button. Hit the subscribe notification bell. That helps. Comment after the video. Lots of comments on the last video. Any ideas, like the Django geek, about having, live viewers come on, put the ideas there. Any recommendations to make the streams better. Obviously, when we have our Friday streams where all the guys are here, those are really fun. Nothing needs to change about that. But these, my Sunday and Tuesday streams, I'm really open to suggestions. Anyways, turn this off to you, and then I'm going to say goodbye.
You are now relearning economics.